Okay, there.
Okay, so hey guys, what's up? So in this video, it's a little bit different today. I have my beautiful wife over here, and we're doing like a podcast style review video for a camera that is right here. So yeah, why not introduce yourself first?
Hi, I'm Clara. Nice to meet you all.
How long have you been doing photography?
I don't remember. A few years. I think I really started using a proper camera since I met Mark. So
But before that, you were always into photography, right?
I started using camera when I was like really small, like 7 years old.
And I remember you even have an Instax. What was that again? Instax. The Instant 8. Instax 8, Mini 8.
Yeah.
Okay. So today we're going to be reviewing or talking about the Canon 6D in 2025. Because a lot of cameras have come out recently, and I feel like this deserves a little bit of the spotlight, you know? Because this has like a forgotten camera in our arsenal now because we've fully switched to Sony. But this, once upon a time, this was Clara's most used camera. So when did you own this? I mean, when did you start using this camera?
2020.
2020, so it's been like 5 years.
Yes.
So let's talk about, let's do it like a pros and cons kind of thing. So we're gonna tackle photos first, and then we'll do the video part. So let's talk about the Canon 6D. So this is a full frame camera. So for all of you who don't know, can you tell us what's the difference between a crop sensor APS-C camera and a full frame camera? So how does it really affect your photos when it comes to maybe shooting in different shooting scenarios, like maybe in low light? How does a full frame affect that?
Yeah, I still remember we were using crop sensor Canon camera, and then since we have this, I was like, wow, it's a whole new world. It's like completely different. When you're using even f4, it looks different, completely different.
By f4, she means the aperture, so that's the opening on the lens. So the aperture affects how much light goes into hits the sensor, right? So first things first, this is a full frame camera. The second thing is that this is like a big enough camera to be treated seriously. We all know that feeling when you're getting into the professional industry and you show up to the scene or to the set with your camera, and then you're using a very small camera. Of course, not all small cameras are bad, right? But if you know what I mean, like Canon M50, if you show up to a set, people are gonna judge you based on the camera you're carrying. But this one is big enough to be treated seriously, right? At the same time, it has the OG Canon look. So if you know Canon cameras, they always look like this, right?
Yep.
Okay, so number 3, budget friendly. So this thing is a lot cheaper now. Do you know why?
Because people all shift to mirrorless camera.
Yeah, so a lot of people now have been shifting to mirrorless, so the prices of DSLR cameras in general have dropped significantly, right?
Yeah, because I started using this camera for photos. So at that time, I was like super noob. I don't know what's the difference between JPEG and RAW. And this is how I kind of like entered to real camera with RAW, RAW quality and JPEG quality.
So for the beginners out there, or for people who are not familiar, what's the difference between shooting JPEG and RAW?
JPEG is good enough. That is how we view a photo in like a camera, in a computer, in a phone. But then RAW has much more data, more than what you can see. But when you edit in like a photo editing software, they actually have more details that they can fine tune or even have a very big change when you adjust your photo.
So what Clara is basically saying, whenever you shoot JPEG, that's what you get. You don't have enough information to edit it, right?
Yeah.
So because whenever you shoot...
Has been explaining myself.
I'm just trying to reiterate what you said. So whenever you shoot JPEG, that's what your phone shoots. Your phone just shoots a JPEG photo, and you try to edit it on Instagram, right? Or maybe apply a filter on it. And have you ever noticed that the photo starts to get like super soft and like pixelated? That's because it doesn't have enough data to be edited. So RAW allows you to maybe lift the shadows. Maybe if it's in low light, you can lift up the shadows. You will have some data there. So yeah, so the Canon 6D can shoot RAW, right? And at the same time, it can shoot JPEG. Is there an option here that can do both RAW and JPEG? I know Sony does.
Yes.
So simultaneously shoot.
Yes. You can choose the different quality of JPEG, like higher quality JPEG or low, medium, and low.
So
quality.
what are the disadvantages of shooting RAW?
You must edit it because it's not like every computer or if you don't have a photo editing software in your computer, you take the RAW and you cannot view it. You don't know what's happening there. But JPEG is like you can view it easily.
So does it have to be a very powerful computer with a dedicated video card or something to be able to edit RAW?
Preferably, but not up to like a video editing computer.
Yeah. How about file sizes? Will RAW be?
Oh yeah, RAW file size is much bigger
What's the
than
approximate
JPEG.
size for each RAW file on the Canon 60? Do you remember? Was it like 25?
Not that much.
Okay.
It still depends on the photo. Yeah, the color and all the
So
information.
the information affects the size of the file.
Always.
Oh, I did not know that. I learned something. Okay. So the next one is number 5. We're going to do the autofocus. So we're going to talk about the autofocus on the Canon 60. So I haven't been using this a lot for photo, but I have at some point used it with video. What do you say about the autofocus on the Canon 60 when it comes to taking photos?
I still remember using the 60 and then there are like a few square there. They would try to find the focus on what you're...
Those are called focus points, by the way.
Yeah. 9 focus point. Yeah. So it's actually pretty good. It's very easy. You know, you can adjust which one you want to go to and then you can do your composition and all.
Low light performance in photography. I have tried this a few times and my expectations were very low because, to be honest, my first mirrorless camera was not... my first actual Canon camera was an APS-C camera. And it wasn't full frame, it was the Canon 60D. And at that time, the Canon 60D is really terrible at low light performance. Like, if I remember correctly, you couldn't even go up to 1600 ISO, but with the Canon 60, how high would you trust it? Like, did you ever bring it up to 3200 or 6400?
I do, but it's grainy already.
Grainy, so what would be a usable ISO level? The highest that you would go, that you can tolerate for professional photography?
1600.
1600 on the 60.
I think it really depends on what kind of photo you're looking for. Because if you want like a very artistic kind, you don't mind the grains and it gives you feel,
Everybody's talking about the character of the grain.
Yeah.
Actually, the good thing about this time of age of starting photography, Photoshop and Lightroom is so good now. Have you seen the denoising thing?
Yeah.
I still can't believe that it is possible to denoise a photo with so much grain. I used to be so skeptical about it. One time I took a photo with like maybe 12,000 ISO. I brought it into Lightroom and I denoised it completely.
Yeah.
And it looks real. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about number 7. This number one thing that Canon users always brag about. This never gets old.
I still remember when I started using this camera. I think we have been using Canon for quite a few years, and then we suddenly changed to other camera like Sony, or I see people using other cameras and their photos like always look so blue, the face always makes people look sick, sorry to say that. But then I think now Sony improved, I think.
Yeah. So we're talking about the color science. Everybody loves to talk about Canon color science. They even bashed Sony a lot. Sony was really bad at color science, but I think after the A7S III, that was the big leap that Sony took, that after the A7 III, the A7S III completely changed the color science. Everything just suddenly improved. They understood what real skin color looks like. Not much magenta shift, if any. So yeah, Canon color science on the 60 is really good because it renders the skin tones properly. What your eye sees is what the camera sees, and it will give you that file, that kind of color, right? You can really rest assured that the 60 can give you clean skin colors.
I want to add something on the autofocus of this camera. Because when the camera was released, 9 focus points was really a very good thing. But of course, after years and after some years, if you still find if you buy a camera with only 9 focus points, it's really bad.
What would a scenario be that the 9 autofocus points would be bad? Like, what would a bad scenario be for this kind of camera?
It's like that your subject is like constantly moving.
Oh, I have a perfect example for that. Remember when you shot that longboarding event, like the downhill racing?
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on using the 60 on that day?
Oh, that's a little bit difficult because skateboarding people are very fast and then they're always moving and you're waiting at one point and then they already left. So if you want to find the autofocus, you may miss the focus, or you want to focus on the eye or the board, so it's a little bit hard at that scenario. But yeah, if you're just shooting an event, people are just on stage, I think that's completely fine. But yeah, if you shoot something that's constantly moving very fast, then it will be difficult.
That's a good point. So the Canon 60 is good with autofocus because I think the main way you use this camera was not for just sports. I remember you shot a wedding with this, some pre-weddings, even family photos, right? For that kind of photo shoot,
it's good.
It's good because they're not going to be running around. Of course, if the family has kids, that's the only time that maybe the autofocus will struggle. But 99% of the time when you're shooting portraits, the subject will be still. So how is the battery life on the Canon 60? It's huge, right? I don't know if I have one battery inside. No, I don't. So what would you say about the battery life?
I think the battery life is okay. It can of course it can sustain more if you just use the viewfinder, but if your screen is always open, switched on when you do photo shoot, then it will burn the battery.
I guess that's the beauty of using the DSLR because you're not using a screen to expose the image. The light is hitting a mirror.
Yep. But
with mirrorless cameras, it has to hit the sensor and then send it to a screen, which you're viewing.
Yep.
This little, what do you call this? The viewfinder, it does not have any electronics on it. It's literally just a mirror connected to the mirror, right? So battery life wise, how long would one battery last if you're shooting throughout the day?
2 to 3 hours.
2 to 3 hours of photo.
Yeah.
So the first, so there are some cons that we wrote down here. The first thing is
no flip screen.
So in what scenario would having a flip screen and not having a flip screen be good or bad?
I remember doing a photo shoot and I was like leaning on the floor or like trying to do different angles. I was like, I cannot see the screen. And that was really difficult. And I'm already on the floor lying down there, but I couldn't see the screen. Yeah.
So no flip screen, right? So if you want to take those low angles, like with maybe like what Claire was saying, like you're going down onto the floor, you have to really put your face in line or parallel to the camera, or maybe you're shooting above. If you're doing this, you have somehow you have to be able to see the screen. So having a flip screen would be nice, but this camera was released, I forgot what year, maybe 2010 or 2013. But I remember my Canon 60 was even released,
60D?
even 60D was released even earlier than that, but it had a flip screen.
Oops.
Yeah, let me get it. Okay, so I have my Canon 60D here. So this was my dad's and he eventually gave it to me. So this was released in 2010 and it has a real flip screen. So I got used to having a flip screen, and when Clara got the 60, it was kind of a downgrade because I don't know, flip screens are just a no-brainer. It should be on every camera. I guess, does it unlock any creative ideas when it comes to shooting? Because you have no flip screen, you're going to be forced to maybe be creative with your angles.
Yeah, and your height.
In your height. Yeah. Second bad thing, I would want to talk about this. This is talking about the dynamic range of the Canon 60. So whenever you're shooting JPEG, because I got used to shooting Panasonic, which is like one of the kings of dynamic range, I had the GH5 a long time ago. And that one had really good dynamic range, not just in video, but in photo as well. So whenever Clara would use this camera, whenever we were hired to shoot, I would be on my GH5 and she would be on her 60. Of course, it's an unfair comparison because the GH5 was a camera released in 2017. This is an older camera. But dynamic range is the ability of the camera to see good both in the shadows and the highlights. This camera doesn't do so well when it comes to dynamic range. If you point it at a very high contrast scene, let's pretend a sunset, the subject is behind the sun. Of course, most cameras won't be able to do that, but if you're shooting raw and you have a camera that has good dynamic range, you're going to be able to raise the shadows on the subject's face. At the same time, not blow out the highlights or overexpose the highlights, right?
In the beginning of my photography journey, I actually do not understand what dynamic range is. But then after I see people using the 5D, I was like, well, how can they do those photos? And I slowly understand, oh, so it's the limit of the camera itself. It's not about what you can do with your photography skills, but it's really about the
photography
build,
skills.
yeah.
That's kind of questionable, because if dynamic range it was the problem, I know I found this out in the later stage of my photography life or journey. I found out that if the dynamic range is the limiting factor, that's when you bring in artificial lighting. For example, if you really want to take a photo of a person next to, behind the sun or something, if you just use the camera by itself without any artificial lighting, the real thing is that you have to be shooting at golden hour. That's when the sun is the softest, right? But if you want to shoot maybe at 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. with just the sun and backlighting the subject, it's not going to happen. So this is when you bring a flash or a strobe or a continuous light, right? So this is too much talking about the dynamic range. Let's talk about the next part. The next part is the inaccurate LCD screen. So how many times have you exposed the image according to the screen on the back of this Canon 60?
There are quite a few times that it looks completely perfect in this screen, and then when I put it back to the computer, I was like, why is it so dark? Yeah, so I have to adjust the exposure, to make it like a little bit brighter than what I needed.
So by adjust exposure, I think you're talking about the actual brightness of the screen, no? There was a time that I was using a camera which had a very bad LCD screen as well. I think it was this camera. It was definitely this camera. Same problem as the 60, because they're a little bit more cheap on the cheaper side. So normally, if you're shooting outdoors, you'd want the screen on the brightest level, right? So to be able to see it in direct sunlight. But if you want to match the camera's LCD screen with what you're actually getting when you take the photo, you're gonna have to do some trial and error. For me, I could not really max out the brightness. I would maybe put it on half. So now let's talk about the video capabilities of the Canon 60. So let's talk about the good first. So the first thing is that it can shoot 25 frames per second, which is the standard when it comes to shooting documentary filming. Anything that requires audio, this is a good camera to do that with, because it has 25 frames per second. Because some cameras only has 30. So what's the difference between shooting 30 and 25?
I don't know.
This isn't scripted, guys. I really asked you that question. So whenever you're shooting a video, right? So you'd want to match with what your eyes sees. So if I were to wave my hand like this, you're gonna see some motion blur, right? So that is maybe 25 frames per second when it comes to the frame rate. And
this one I know.
Yeah.
But then the problem is, not everybody's eyes are trained to see the difference between 25 and 30.
That's actually a good point, because do you know that some TV broadcasting agencies or the TV shows, they actually use 30 frames per second? Yeah. They don't use 25. I learned that from Fi and Barrel.
I tried many times to explain to some people that, there is motion blur. It's like, what? What?
It really hurts me whenever I see other people, especially in our church. I remember when our church started live streaming, I remember the camera was set to 50 frames per second. I was like, ouch. It really looks so weird. Everybody looks so robotic. The motion blur isn't there. Whenever the guitarist is strumming, it looks like very robotic. It doesn't look natural. So the key word here is natural. This can shoot 25 frames per second, which can look natural to the human eye. The motion blur is normal. So the next thing is talking about motion blur. No, I'm not talking about motion blur. The next good thing that this camera can do is this thing right here. How do I undo this? So this thing has what does it have here?
What's that? Oh. Microphone jack.
So this has a microphone jack. It has a 3.5 millimeter microphone jack. So this opens up a lot of possibilities, because now, just in case you're not recording audio separately, you can plug in a lavalier microphone directly to this camera, or a shotgun microphone. So this is good for documentary filmmaking or anything that requires a microphone. You can set up an interview with this, and it's quite cheap because the camera is cheap and you can plug it directly using the 3.5mm jack. One thing though, we're gonna talk about it later in the cons part, but the problem with the Canon 60 are the preamps inside. Preamps mean whenever you plug in a microphone into a camera, it's using some kind of signal to boost the audio, right? So this one has really bad preamps. So if you're gonna plug in a microphone, a 3.5mm microphone onto the Canon 60, it must be a very loud sounding microphone. It cannot be a very quiet microphone. So one quiet microphone would be the Rode Video Micro, the Gen 1. That one is a very quiet microphone. I think if you're gonna use it with this camera, you're gonna have to boost the audio all the way to 15 dB. So yeah, the next thing is the frame rate, or just the resolution. This can shoot 25 frames per second in 1080, right? So no 4K.
No 4K.
No 4K. So it's kind of painful to consider that because all of cameras now can shoot 4K. But I guess if you're on a budget, 4K might not really be the priority. The priority would be the reliability of the camera. Can it shoot clean 1080, which this camera can, right? So let's talk about the bad.
The 30-minute recording limit. We always have that problem while we shoot interview. It's almost done. Oh, can you wait for a second? We have to do it again.
So there's a recording limit on this camera, a 30-minute recording limit. This is fine if you're in control with the set, but let's pretend it's a very long interview and the subject is already super warmed up. He's already flowing with whatever he or she is trying to say, and there's a recording limit and you have to pause them and you have to say, can we stop really quick? I have to press stop and start again. I think first of all, I think it's safe to say that that's very unprofessional because maybe you're interviewing a CEO, the CEO of a very upper class or a big company, and you only have a few minutes with that person, and that person is, he's a very high class person, and you want to stop him when he's flowing already. I think this camera work is going to struggle with that. Or you could do a hack wherein maybe you're asking the second question and you can sneakily press this button over here and roll it again, right? So there are a few workarounds, but if you're getting this camera to be able to record continuously, this might not be the camera for you, but there are workarounds. You just have to keep in mind there is a 30-minute recording limit. So no log shooting. This means it's a very specific niche that we're talking about right now. Log means it's like taking raw photos in photography. You have more information. So this does not have log like S-Log on Sony, which it allows you to have more dynamic range. You can see more in the shadows and more information in the highlights. So this has no log. So you can shoot neutral though. What's the difference between shooting neutral and standard on the Canon 60?
Neutral has less contrast.
So neutral has less. If you're going to go into the picture, do you call it picture profiles or picture styles?
Forgot.
I think in Canon call it picture styles, because in Sony we call it picture profiles. So if you put the picture style on neutral, you will have a little bit better dynamic range. Of course, it's fake dynamic range because you're just reducing the contrast. So you can't reduce it too much, or else you're boosting the blacks too much. So if dynamic range is your problem, you can put it on neutral, even though you don't have log. So the next thing is no 1080p 60 frames per second. Oh, that's a little bit, I think it's okay, but most cameras now can shoot at least 60 frames per second.
Yep.
Because if you want to do slow motion, I think this camera can only do 60 frames in 720, which is unacceptable in 2025. So do not get this camera if you're planning to do slow motion. This is more of a documentary / photography kind of camera. The next thing is no continuous video autofocus.
There were like 2 important shoots I did, and I don't have an external screen, and I thought it looks so clean here and this small screen, but I actually lost the focus. Even with the zebra or the red line.
Zebras are not for focus.
Oh,
focus peaking is for focus. Zebras are for exposure.
Oh, sorry.
She's not a video shooter. I'm the video shooter. So this thing has no continuous autofocus. So definitely not for vlogging. I have vlogged with this before. I tried a 17 to 40 lens. I had to put the aperture on 5.6, I think, or f8 to make sure that the depth of field is deep enough. So even if I move a lot, I will still be in focus. So this has no continuous video autofocus. So you're gonna have to practice manual focus because you're just gonna switch off autofocus completely and rely on manual focus. It's very easy. You don't have to stress about it. You just have to learn it. This has no autofocus in video. The next thing that it doesn't have is dual SD card slots. I know this is a very specific thing to talk about just because I'm using the A7S III, the Sony A7S III and the A7 IV, which has 2 SD card slots. Because whenever you're shooting professionally, it's very important that you have a backup. Let's pretend you're shooting a wedding. It's a person's most important day, right? And somehow one of your SD cards fail. If you were using the 60 and that SD card fails, you're gonna have to start digging your own grave because I don't know what you're gonna tell the bride. But at the same time, if you are using a reliable SD card, which you should, does it matter when it comes to the V60, V30? Not really, right? Because I think since this is an older camera, it doesn't matter what SD card you use as long as it's a reliable one. SanDisk is good. I have yet to have a corrupted SD card from SanDisk. Knock on wood.
Oops.
Okay, one more specific thing. There is no direct way to power this thing because this has no USB-C port because it's from 2013. So what are your workarounds if you want to have continuous power on the Canon 60? I think you do that in your office, right? You have a Canon M50 with a dummy battery.
Yeah.
So a dummy battery would be...
This one can do too.
Yeah. So this has the ability to plug in a dummy battery. So a dummy battery would be, the battery would not have direct power or power inside. You would have to plug it into mains power, like a USB socket, and then you can run this camera indefinitely. Because if you just rely on the built-in battery and you're recording a very long video, it's not reliable. So we're almost done here. Sorry if it's a little bit long. This is the first time we've ever done this, but we're gonna be talking about some tips. I'm gonna be giving the first tip that I have when you're using the Canon 60. So if you're a video shooter and you're planning to use this 60, my first tip is to either install Cinestyle, which allows you to have a little bit of a flatter picture profile when it comes to video. So you will have a little bit more leeway to maybe slap on a LUT if you want to have a specific look to your video, not just the normal Canon look. You can install Cinestyle, which is a free LUT that you can download from, I forgot, technicolor.com, but I'm going to leave a link down below where you can download it. And the second thing you can do to this thing is install Magic Lantern. Have you ever heard of Magic Lantern? So Magic Lantern is something that some 6D users or Canon users have invented that allows you to turn whatever old Canon camera you have into a cinema camera. Yeah, so Magic Lanterns allows you to have, believe it or not, you can unlock zebras, I think, on a 60. You can even have focus peaking, which this camera does not have. So the second thing that I want to talk about is lens recommendations. Any tips on what lenses people should buy for the Canon 60?
I think the kit lens is pretty good. The
Kit lens.
24 to 105 f4. That's pretty good if you're just using a daytime. And if you're indoor, I think we have a Tamron 24 to 70.
24 to 70 from Tamron is a lot cheaper than the Canon version. That's for sure.
But if you can't afford it,
telephoto lenses. Any cheap 70 to 200s you can recommend?
Also Tamron.
Tamron. It's a lot cheaper than the Canon. Again, sorry, it's a little bit overexposed now because we're in our living room and the sun's coming out. So let's talk about the final thoughts or recommendations about this camera. So who would you recommend this camera for?
I think if someone is looking for a budget full frame and DSLR, should go for this because it has all the basic things. It's full frame, it's DSLR, and it's budget friendly. And if you want to try to see if you want to pursue photography or something like that, and then I think this is a very good basic full frame camera you can go for.
And it's not gonna hurt your wallet too much because some people maybe they're like an impulsive buyer. They suddenly think that, oh, I want to buy a camera, and they go for the most expensive camera, and a week later or 2 weeks later that camera just ends up on a shelf collecting dust. So this is not going to be that camera because I'm pretty sure if you're watching this video, you've done your research, you've heard of this legendary camera. because it may be a very cheap camera now, but honestly, if I were to do a photo shoot right now, if somebody was gonna hire me and I needed a camera that is not expensive, I would use this camera. Even if I had my E7 IV right now, I could still pull this out and I could still get decent photos with it. One regret that I have, I already sold your 24 to 105 because I remember we were transitioning to Sony and we needed money, so we sold our 24 to 105, but we still have Clara's Tamron 24 to 70 and her 70 to 200. So who is this camera not for? I'm definitely gonna say if you are a vlogger and you are a beginner vlogger at that, because if I were to vlog with this, I think I can tolerate it and I can handle it. But if you're a beginner vlogger and you just want to talk to the camera without worrying about the settings or what it can do, this camera might not be for you because of the main thing that I talked about. This has no video autofocus. So I'm used to using manual focus, so I can just rack focus all day if I wanted to. But this camera is definitely not for vloggers just because of that main weakness of not having real-time video autofocus. So this video has been a long video because this is, again, the first time we've ever done this. Let us know in the comments down below if you like these kind of videos, because I like being able to just talk to another person here to just discuss about a camera instead of just me talking about it. So any final thoughts you want to share?
I remember the first time I used this camera is not this one, but my colleague's one. And we were always like so amazed by the photos that this camera can do, the video this camera can do.
You're talking about Sunny, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I remember Sunny's style is always high key lighting.
Yeah.
High key lighting would mean no contrast. It's like always everything is highlights.
Yeah. So this is really a powerful camera, but of course there are so many new cameras out now. So maybe people want to have like a better autofocus camera. But then if you still have this camera, I think this is still a very good camera. It can do really good photos and videos. Yeah.
So thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and we will see you guys next time. Good job.
So embarrassing.